Good morning. It is good to speak with you again from the sanctuary. This is the fourth Sunday of Easter, and so our passage for the fourth Sunday of Easter is always the Psalm 23. And those are really wonderful words. They're ancient words to us and words we know really well, but sometimes it is the things we know the best that we run the risk of overlooking. So I want us to hear these words again as God speaks them to us in our present context. Hear the word of the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. As I said, sometimes we know a thing so well that we run the risk of not hearing its words, but listen again for these words. I would like us to walk through this psalm and to think about each of these phrases and to place them in the context that we are experiencing right now. The first thing the psalmist says is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Another way to say that, of course, is, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need." That's a really interesting thing in our present context, because one of the things we are experiencing right now is the feeling of shortage. I remember that at the time that apparently everybody went out and bought all of the toilet paper they would need for 6 years. I was working with the session vote to shut down the church, so I didn't get out to purchase toilet paper along with everyone else, so that when I went into the store, it was all gone. And a funny thing happened to me, and maybe that's happened to you as well. I was immediately frightened. There's no reason for it. I knew that I would once again find these things that everybody had snatched off the shelves, but for that moment, I didn't have everything I needed. And I was frightened about the uncertainty that that left me with. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. One of the things we have all come to realize in the midst of this time is the truth of those words. Whatever it is that we were anxious about, or whatever it is that we were afraid we didn't have enough of the physical things we needed, or enough of the emotional resources, or the many millions of things we were going to need to weather this time, we have come to discover that, yes, we do have everything we need, that we are cared for, that the things that we worry about are actually somewhat small in the perspective of this whole pandemic. It has been interesting to me to discover the truth of that for myself, not about physical things or trivial things. And believe me, these things aren't trivial if you are frightened about those, and that's a very real fear for you. But it has been very calming and comforting to me to discover that I have everything I need in the presence of God and the comfort and strength of God, and this time has just reiterated that. We move on to another phrase, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." And the psalmist is very clear about that. God makes us do the thing that is good for us, the thing that will provide us with pleasure. God makes us slow down. It has been an interesting piece of this time that we have all learned to slow down, not by choice. We are still people who want to be all about being and doing and finding all the ways to do those things, but we have been made to slow down. And we are discovering the gifts of that kind of time as well. We are discovering what happens when we are able to take that breath, to slow down. The next phrase said, God restores my soul, and I think that's an incredible gift for us. Soul in this context means life or passion or essence. Restoring that which is uniquely us at the very heart of our being. We are being restored during this time as well. We are being brought back into contact with the thing that makes us us, makes us who we are. Time and again, when I've spoken with people over the last couple of weeks, they've said, well, you know, this has really been an opportunity for me to find out what's important. That's always a good thing for us to have the opportunity to do, to take stock of the things that are important and to realize the things that aren't. And in doing so, we find our soul restored. We find that the essence of who we are comes to the forefront. The psalmist goes on to talk about the valley of the shadow of death, or in other translations, the dark valley. And I think this has become incredibly close to us during this time, hasn't it? The psalmist says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, you are with me. And I hope you've discovered the truth of that for yourself. I hope you've had time to feel the presence of God even in the midst of darkness, even in the midst of those things which frighten us the most, the uncertainty, or the things we are beginning to feel certain about that frighten us. I hope that you have found the truth of that statement, that God walks with us through even the darkest valley. One of the things that we see most often these days on commercials or in online in newspapers or articles written is those words, you are not alone, we are in this together. And I think that home truth has been a very important thing for us to experience and hold on to. But before all of that was true, it was true that God walked with us in the midst of these things. So in the midst of isolation or fear or uncertainty about today or bleak thoughts about tomorrow, all of those things which make up the valley of the shadow for us, we know that we are not alone in that because God walks with us through that. The psalmist says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. When we think of that table prepared before us, we people it with all sorts of things, but we don't often think of sitting down to table with our enemies, do we? Especially at this time, you would say, well, we're not really sitting down at table with anyone, but we bring things to the table. We bring personal demons, our insecurities or our fears, our obsessions, our anger, our feeling of impotence, our feeling of terror. All of these things, our enemies surround us, yet God prepares a table in the midst of that to strengthen us and to heal us. So that, as the psalmist goes on to say, our cup overflows. I was really interested when I did a word study of that phrase because not only does it carry a beautiful image of its own, of a cup just overflowing, but also that phrase in ancient Hebrew could also mean to get drunk. And the wine of God's care overflows, inebriates us so that we can say we are just soaked in the love of God. We are soaked in the God's care and comfort and strength for us. Finally, of course, we probably never thought of the phrase, surely goodness and mercy shall follow us all the days of our life. And yet, that is a truth of our life, is it not? A friend of mine spent a good deal of time as a missionary in Africa, and so he continues to do a lot of reading about the church in Africa, and he shared a book with me called Christianity Rediscovered, written by a Catholic missionary to Kenya, Vincent Donovan. And in this book, he met with a Maasai elder to talk about faith. And the old man said that for a man really to believe is like a lion going after his prey. His nose and his ears and eyes pick up the prey, and his legs give him the speed to catch up with it, and all the power in his body is involved in that terrible death leap and that single blow that will kill the prey. And as the animal goes down, the lion envelops it in his arms. The Africans call these front paws the arms, pulls it to himself and makes it part of himself. This is the way a lion kills. So the old Maasai elder said, this is the way a man believes. This is what faith is. All the time we think we are the lion, but the lion is God. We think of faith as something we pursue, as something we go out in search of, something we drag to the ground, but God pursues us from behind and drags us into himself. We don't have to seek after God because God pursues us all the days of our lives. And so we can think, finally, when we think about the uncertainty of our days to come and all of the unknowns and all the question marks that fill that horizon, one thing we can be sure about, that we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And when we hear that old phrase, that almost quaint phraseology from an old psalm, there is a sense of peace, I think, a sense of knowing that regardless of the things we have no power over and cannot change and don't know about, one thing we can be sure of, and that is that we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I hope that gives you peace. I hope that you are able to hear and take that into yourself. I wish you a very good week. I hope that you are well, that you stay well, that you check in on one another, and that you feel the sense of God's peace around you this week once again as the landscape begins to change and things begin to bloom and all of the things that make for a beautiful Michigan spring start to bloom. I hope that it speaks to you of the love of God. Amen.